Yesterday, when we were riding home with Swamiji in the car, he said very quietly, I hope many people who are attending this week will go on to start communities, or at least to join them. And this is it's the deepest wish of his heart. He said yesterday also, I've had two desires in life, one to find God and the other to help other people find him. But communities, when we ask, why is it important? Because communities are the vehicle in our time for finding God. It's as simple as that. And that's why Swamiji has dedicated his life in this effort. When you look back at when Swami describes the steps in his own life that led him, his interest to communities and founding them, he talked about when he was a young boy, 15, in 1941, as World War II was breaking out. And he grew up, as we know, in Europe and England. And he saw everything that he knew and loved being destroyed, or at least changed in such a way it would never be the same. And it deeply affected him. And he wrote a play when he was 15 called The Peace Treaty. And we're going to see it Thursday night, but it's evolved and in its message as he has evolved in consciousness over the years. But when he first wrote that play, it ended in global destruction. But as I say, if you haven't seen the play yet, we'll be performing it Thursday night, and it no longer ends with despair, but with hope. And then he said, from that he decided to write a novel. And the novel was going to be about a period in time after the world had gone through a global conflagration, and a small handful of people gathered together in South America. And they brought different skills and different talents, and they were going to try to reclaim society, hold the light aloft. And he began to see that Swamiji, this was again in his late teens, that there was hope for social betterment. And then his mind was always probing. And you know, I look out now, just as a brief aside, and I see a number of young people. And Swami has commented to us very often during these months he's been with us on this last visit, how happy he is to see all the young people coming, because he said they have to take up the banner and they have to go on and build the communities of the future. But he began to think, Swami, as his thoughts probed deeper and deeper, what can I do? I can't change society, but I can attune my mind to a higher consciousness. I can seek inner enlightenment. And of course, it was that impulse that led him to finding Autobiography of a Yogi and to meeting Master September 12th, 1948. 60 years ago. 60 years ago. And as he became Master's disciple that day, and Swami's been talking more readily during this visit, and we'll try to capture the things he said in books and things that will be written in the future. But he said, many of us know the story, Master blessed him, and then there were this was in Hollywood Church, and there were 3 or 4 people waiting around in the church, and Master came out, and he said, Jyotish said to him yesterday, in fact, he said, Master must have been so pleased when you came to him because he saw the potential you had for building his work. And Swami said, when Master came out on the stage, the Swami was there and 3 or 4 other people, and he said with great solemnity, he's written this in the past, but never quite with the impact. We have a new brother. But it was as though we have the beginning of a new vision now, someone who can understand what I'm trying to do and fulfill it in a way no one else has. And then imagine Swami's thrill when he realized that this deep-seated desire, this interest for building intentional spiritual communities was one of the basic mission statements of Yogananda, bringing together these 2 themes of his life, the search for inner enlightenment and social betterment. And here, I've lived at Ananda for 40 years, and I'm only just beginning to understand what it is we're doing here and why it is important. I mean, we get so caught up in the little details and the problems and how will we make this happen and how do we do this? And you realize that there is this incredible wave that we are riding, and we are just little pieces of flotsam and jetsam being carried forward on this wave of social change, social betterment, and inner enlightenment. And when you think about this beautiful lifestyle that is so much a part of us, we don't even, it's like a fish in water, we're not aware of it. And I've actually been thinking about it more deeply than I ever have in these weeks preceding this class, because I thought, why? Why communities? I've done it my whole adult life, but why was it important? And I began seeing it's an expression of the yogic principles perfectly in outward manifestation. The first one, and it's such a basic part of Master's teachings, don't do anything because I say so. You experiment and you experience for yourself. And that's the basis of everything we've done here. Swami never said, well, maybe we better not do this because it might not work. He said, jump off the cliff and don't look back. And if you fail, and you pick up your mangled body from the bottom of the cliff and you keep going. And we have all done this time and time again. Ananda has not been built from leaping from glorious success to glorious success. It has been built by picking ourselves up from failure after failure after failure, and that is the secret of our success. As Master said, my body may be bloodied but unbroken. And that's what Ananda is. It's that ability not to be afraid, but to experiment. Experiment with meditation. Master said, you could take the worst sort of low-minded, low-class boys, and if I teach them Kriya Yoga, and if they practice it as I have taught them, that's the caveat there, as I have taught them, within a very short time, they will become saints. And so just that process of practicing meditation, trying it, not to think, well, I'm going to fail. So what if you fail? So what if you do? I know for me, and I'm sure this is true of all of those who have earnestly sought God, the times where I knew my life was the most blessed was when I was at the bottom, when I was on my knees, and I said, I'm not done yet. Here I am. I'm on my knees, but I'm not finished. And a friend of mine was recently battling cancer and came through it successfully, and she would come into work every day. Even if it was 5 minutes, she worked in my office, our office. And she was going through chemo and radiation and surgery, and she'd come in every day, and she'd say, you know what I say as I'm going to work every day? I walk to work, I say, God, I'm not dead yet. And she has pulled through, and she's just a radiant, beautiful soul. But to have the courage to go out there and say, you can't do communities. Well, maybe we can't, but darn it, we're going to try. You can't do this. You can't publish books. You can't build urban communities. You can't find God. Well, maybe not, but we are going to try and just try to stop us. And with that spirit, we have been able to transform our lives. And I've seen it so often that Swamiji is more pleased. I know this in my heart, not with the results. We're so trained in the way we're educated, success-oriented. Success proves greatness. It's not if you win or lose, but it's the effort to try. So number one, that's the yogic principle of experiment and experience it for yourself. Why do we live in communities? Because it's such a challenging, overwhelming, frustrating, liberating experience. And we know it. We have lived it. And then the second thing, the yogic principle that underlies why communities are important is to live in a vision of the unity of all life. It's all one. And all the little parts of the community, the market, the gardens, the school, the businesses, the administration, the Sangha ministries, nobody's competing with each other. We're all realize we're doing the same thing. I remember many years ago when our son was about 5 or 6 years old, and for those of you who have raised children, you know that sometimes the most precious moments in a parent-child relationship are those moments when you're putting the child to bed and the little things that they'll say because it's unguarded from the soul. And so our son was we were putting him to bed one night, and he was thinking, and he said, you know, Mommy, the people who work at the market, they think about the market and how to make it good. The people who work at the dairy, we had a dairy at this time. Thank you, Nakula. And he said, the people who work in the dairy, they think about how to make the dairy good. And he went on and named several things. And he said, but Swamiji, he thinks about everything and how to make it all good. And to live in this vision of unity. And I know when the children that have gone through our school system, and last night we saw some extraordinary examples. I know it was my experience, and some friends also this morning said they were weeping when they saw those children dancing because of what they will bring to the future. Something we had to work at. For them, they're picking it up at an early stage. But we've heard that when our children go on to high school, or in fact, this happened to our son. He went on to a local junior high because there wasn't a junior high here at the time. And his teacher said, it's so amazing with the children from Ananda because they are able to relate to everyone, be it their peer, being it a younger child, being it a teacher, being a principal. They don't treat anybody differently. It's a unified vision that everyone is our friend. They sang it last night. All the world is my friend when I know how to share my love. And we share our love when we see it's all one. It isn't separate. And this is what yoga is and meditation. It transcends all religions. It transcends all creeds and practices and dogmas. It's a unified vision. In India, they call it Sanatan Dharma, but it simply means there is a righteousness and a blessedness which permeates every aspect of our home, of our work, of our service, of our body, of our mind, that underlying presence of the divine in everything that we do. And one of the extraordinary joys of living in community is watching people live their lives. So if they're answering phones, if they're hosting guests, if they're planting gardens, if they're painting walls, whatever it may be, every aspect is lived in that unified vision of God's presence in us all. Now, Swami wrote a book in 1967, when Ananda was, shall we say, just a twinkle in his eye. And in that book, I remember reading it in 1969 when I first got here. And I believe Jyotish and Seva, who were Swami's stalwarts even before Ananda existed, they typed it up. After work, they'd go into Swami's apartment, type it up, and run it off on a little home mimeograph machine and staple it together, I suppose, and put it in bookstores. And little by little, that book got out. And I remember when I arrived, 1969, I read that little book. And that book was prophetic. Cooperative communities, how to start them, and why. And in that book, he expresses certainly a lifetime, and in truth be told, many lifetimes of thinking about social transformation and inner enlightenment. And when you read it, you thought he knew it all. And when I read it in 1969, I thought, yes, of course, this is so self-evident. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that God created us all, that we were made to live in joy, that we were made to live in harmony and cooperation, not competition with our fellow human beings. And he outlines it with simple, humble, joyous thoughts. It's so simple that one might almost overlook it. And yet it is a seed for the future of our planet. And in that book, he talks about, and I was looking recently at the 7th edition, which came out in 1972, which was, after all, just 4 years into the creation of the community. And in that book, he talks about the 3 secrets for Ananda's success. And when I looked at them, I thought, absolutely true here 40 years later. And he said the first one was that we find our peace inwardly through meditation first, and secondarily in outward things and in other people. And I have seen the most extraordinary examples of this truth, of people finding their truth inwardly through meditation, finding their peace. And no matter what happens, no matter how that peace is challenged and threatened, that peace is never lost if we find it first in meditation. I remember the day of the fire that Swamiji spoke about in 1976. And I remember standing in the market area. Everything that we had worked for 8 years was totally burnt to the ground, ashes. I loved what Durga said once. Her mother called her after the fire, and she was saying, "Did you get your furniture out?" "No, Mom, we didn't get anything out." "Did you get your clothes out?" "No, Mom." And then she was going on and on. And finally Durga said, "Mother, think about a handful of ashes. That's what we have." And I think her mom got the point then. But I remember that day, and I was trying so hard to feel God's presence. And then I remember at a certain point, Seva and Jyotish and I kind of were standing together, and I looked in their eyes, and there was absolute peace, honestly. And I said, "I wonder where we're going to build the next community." And it looked like Hiroshima after the bomb. And they just looked at me, not challenging, not judgmental, but just calmly and with inner peace. And they said, "Oh, we'll just rebuild it here." And I knew that we would, because I knew that power of soul force that comes from connecting your peace with the greater peace would serve us to do this. And I remember another test we went through, 12 years of legal battle, in which we triumphed unbelievably. And then I remember we had one day here where we had a celebratory weekend, and we invited the lawyers who had represented us, who had become our good friends by this time. And I remember John Parsons, who was a dear and great man who represented us all those many years through thick and thin. And he stood up weeping. And he said, "You people of Ananda," he said, "I have fought shoulder to shoulder with you through thick and thin, and in the bright times and in the dark times." He said, "You have found an ability to go forward with calmness and peace that I do not understand, but which I stand in awe of." Where does that come from? It comes from finding the peace within yourself. More recently, we had a tragedy strike our community. The 25-year-old son of a dear friend and member was killed in a tragic accident about a few weeks ago. But a few weeks ago, we had a memorial service for him in this amphitheater, and he was an extraordinary young man. He had the ability to live, he born and grew up at Ananda, the ability to live in joy and kindness, all the principles that we live here. And this amphitheater was filled with hundreds and hundreds of his friends. All of them were grief-stricken. Many of them were openly weeping. And his mother, who is a dear friend of mine. And I knew the grief she was going through because I had been with her during those days. And she stood up here, and with calmness and peace in her heart, she projected meaning and peace to those hundreds and hundreds of his friends who had come. It was the most extraordinary thing I have ever seen in my life. And I bow at the manifestation of Divine Mother in that woman who was able to transcend her own grief and do that. It was inner peace, the secret of Ananda's success. The second point that Swami says, the secret of our success, is to see our life, see our work as joyous service. And the work days beyond number that we have had in this community, whether it was pouring, whether it was sunny, whether we were ill, whatever the circumstances, but the joyous service. And I want to read a quote from a book that's going to be coming out soon. This is an extraordinary book by Barbara Bingham called Crystal Hermitage, a photographic pilgrimage to the spiritual heart of Ananda Village. And it's the most Barbara's a gifted photographer. God comes through her in her photos. And she used quotes from different of Swami's writings throughout the book. And I just read this a few days ago, and I wanted to share it with you. This is Swami he's talking about Crystal Hermitage, but it applies to all of Ananda. Crystal Hermitage, or Ananda, is singularly blessed in the fact that it was built almost entirely by friends of mine. Their energy continues to flow into it, even now, to be amplified and returned to them manyfold. I thought that was so beautiful, because what we do for other people, maybe they remember, maybe they don't. But what we do in joyous service to God comes back to us many times and is amplified. And when you look out and see the radiant, joyous faces of people who have given their lives to God, it's in large part because what they've done, unbeknownst to them, comes back and has been amplified many, many times. I remember, it was probably 1977 or so. We were having a work day. We were building the expanding light. It didn't exist then. And we were having a work day, and we had planned it for weeks and weeks, and all these projects and all this building material. And the day dawned, the work day, and lo and behold, it was pouring rain. And we thought, well, put on our rain suits and get out there. And there was one young man who was living here then, not now, but he was probably mid-20s, but as a young boy, he had had a leg amputated from cancer at the hip. And he had an artificial leg. And he wanted to be on the roofing party. Well, it's not easy to stand on a roof when you have two stable legs. And he had one artificial leg, and it was raining, and it was slippery. And he said, well, let's do it. And he was out there, and he was working away all day long. And at the end of the day, I happened to bump into him, and he said, you know what happened today? And I said, no, what? He said, a miracle. A miracle. He said, what I did today was not possible, and yet I did it, and I felt God with me every single moment of it. Just to look at what we do and say, this isn't for me. If I tried to do it for me, I couldn't do it. But I can do anything when I see it as joyous service. I remember many years ago when I was a child, someone gave us, our family, a tin of cookies, and on it, I'm not sure if it was from a Christmas Carol or Boys Town or what it was, but it showed two little poor boys, a bigger one and another one who had the other little boy on his shoulder. And I always remember looking at that because the quote was, he ain't heavy, he's my brother. And if we see all the world that way, there's nothing that's hard, there's nothing that's heavy. And that segues into our final point, to seek God see God in all people, to see no one outside your acknowledgement. Swami said to me recently, and I know it was a personal guideline, but it applies to all of us. He looked at me very directly and he said, as long as there is one person of everyone you know that you do not embrace as your own, that is a serious obstacle to finding God. One person. And he looked at me very deeply when he said that. And I knew what he was saying. He said, yes, Devi, you have a kind and loving heart, but if there's anybody that you're not embracing in that will be your block to finding God. Think about that. And think about that one person. Maybe you can love everybody, but there's that one person. That's where your battle lies. You know, a few days ago, I had a great blessing to be present when Swamiji was talking with one of our great saints who lives in our community. He's not here today because he's serving at his clinic, Dr. Peter. And someone had commented to another person, in case you don't know, Dr. Peter Van Houten is one of our ministers, lived here for 35 years, started a little clinic to serve Nevada, this area, the North San Juan Ridge, we call it. And this is a very poor area. And by and large, the clientele are uneducated people, poor people, people who have washed out of society in general, people with problems. You go and sit in the waiting room, and there they all are. And Peter started out in a little trailer, and just over the years, built it and built it. Now they serve, I believe, 6,000 or 7,000 people from all over the area. The facilities have expanded, the staff has expanded, but it's always a struggle. I don't think a month goes by where they're not sure that the clinic is going to be able to stay open, but it has endured. But Peter was talking with Swamiji, and Peter was a brilliant young medical student. They foresaw, his teachers and professors foresaw a great career for him in research or whatever. And you know, we all have seen the doctors who are brilliant and successful and rich and go to the golf course for, 4 afternoons a week. And you look in their faces. I have relatives just like that. And you look in their faces, and their faces say, where did I go wrong? And there was Peter, and someone was commenting about a story recently where a very poor, disheveled man was at the clinic, and they said to someone else, Peter has taken care of me for 25 years. He's not just my doctor, he's my best friend. And I'm sure that story is amplified hundreds of thousands of times. And Swami said to Peter, and there was a man who could have had a lucrative, successful, prestigious career, and he gave it all away to serve people. And serve not easy people to deal with, people who come in drunk, and people who come in dirty, and people who come in strung out on drugs. And Peter said, but they have no one else. And Swami said, what a wonderful service you've done, Peter. And Peter said, well, they have no one else to take care of them. And Swami said, they're very blessed to have you as their doctor. And Peter looked down and he said, I'm very blessed to be their doctor. And it was a treasure to witness such a deeply sincere exchange. And this is what Ananda is. It's to see no boundaries of how broad our heart can reach, no limitations on how we can pursue our dreams. The beautiful words, follow your dream, though it leads to worlds unknown, from Swami's song. Life's but a shadow once our dreams have flown. What if men cry, your dream is not our own? Your soul knows the answer. Go on alone. And we have gone on, perhaps not alone, but with a precious, precious few of us who are carrying forward a vision that, as Swamiji has said, not with pride, not with personal attachment, but with profound divine vision, Ananda is the most important thing happening in the world today, because it gives people a model for how to live their life with God in every aspect, and how to find God deep within themselves, and how to let other people see this is possible. So we share with you our life, our failures, our successes, but more than any of that, we share with you and invite you to be a part of this dream, which is more worthwhile than any of the dreams that people dream of worldly fulfillment. God bless you.